Oh, good morning. Is this PD?
Yes, hi.
Hi, this is Susan Bird. How are you?
Right. Hi, Susan. How are you?
I'm great. Is this still a good time for us to talk?
Yeah, let's do it.
Super. Okay. So, as I think I might have mentioned to you, there'll be a bio of you that'll be included with this and an introduction of sorts about what you're up to. So, I'll just start this as if that's already occurred and you assume that that'll be part of it. So,
Okay.
let me start by just saying, PD, welcome to this podcast entitled Are Values Still a Value? I'm happy that we're talking today.
I am too.
Good. Um, so let's just start at the very beginning, and that is from your perspective, what do we mean when we say values? What are values?
Well, I think values are sort of the sometimes written but often unwritten sort of rules, if you will, that underlie, the visible rules by which we operate. Um, so, not just do this, don't do this, but ultimately, what are the rules and laws that we establish? What are they designed to accomplish? What what goals and principles underlie them? That's what I sort of would use to describe values.
Okay. So, how would you say values apply in an individual life? Like, how do values play a role in your life? Is it because underlying it all, you have a set of rules that somehow you've either inherited or you've made for yourself, and from them spring the values by which you live?
Yeah, I guess so. A set of principles, right? A set of guiding principles that should inform everything that we do. The very specific or the very broad, but ultimately that the things that we do, right, are guided by these underlying principles of what is right and what is wrong.
Mm-hmm. So, what role do values play in the work of a lawyer? I mean, there is a highly rule based, principle based profession, really.
Yes, values I think underlie everything that a lawyer should do, in the sense that when you are faced with a legal issue, yes, of course you look at the rules, you look at precedents, you look at laws, all of those things, but all of those things ultimately have to fit in with your underlying values as a lawyer, right? How you treat people, what your relationship is to truth. All of those things ultimately are supported by your individual values and also the values of the organization that you're working for, because organizations have values as well.
Well, actually, that brings me to a next question, which is about organizations. Because in today's world, we know there are some people who feel it's really important for organizations, whether they're for profit or not for profit, that they be based on a set of values that are understood to be somehow good in terms of their social impact. And then there are others who say, no, wait a second. Such good values are of little relevance, at least as they pertain to for-profit businesses, because the important thing there is to make a profit, regardless of whether the company's products or services are really good in terms of having any social impact. What does that all mean, and where do you stand on that? Is this just sort of a new thing about values-driven businesses?
Well, I don't think it's a new thing. I mean, I think that the one of the key differentiators between businesses that survive in the long run, businesses that have a broad impact, is the question is the issue of values. And I think it's a mistake to think about values as somehow being in opposition to profit. I think the most successful businesses, I think this is demonstrably true, are businesses that have a strong corporate culture and corporate identity and a strong corporate purpose, which are supported by the values of the institution. Our company, the company I work for now, has been in business, in various corporate forms for about 300 years. and it has a very strong corporate culture that, of course, we want to make money, but it's a corporate culture that's also rooted in its underlying social purpose, right? And we articulate those today with, with certain key values, but but that's ultimately why a company exists 10 years from now and 20 years from now, and over the generations, because they're committed to, they have a culture, they have values, and that is that is also quite compatible with a successful business, one that endures and provides profit not just for 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, but for 20 and 50 years.
So that, and the firm for which you're working now is GlaxoSmithKline. I can say that with, clearly you say that with some pride. I think that's an impressive story. I didn't realize it was 300 years. That's quite impressive.
Right. Well, it's been in it's obviously many acquisitions, many divestitures, and has a long, long history. But the oldest predecessor company goes back about 300 years.
That's impressive. Now, do we have any evidence that a values-driven business, as you define it, can be actually more profitable than it would be otherwise if it really made this a key piece of its in its DNA and it professes that?
Well, I know there's been a lot of studies in the business schools about that, and I think there is a lot of support for that. I think in our own world, we see that values and companies with healthy corporate cultures survive, right, generation after generation, and I think that is probably the strongest evidence that values matter in the business world.
So I guess that makes me think of companies that are in a business that people at some stage may decide are not of social value. I'm thinking here of, the vices of tobacco and that sort of thing. Where does that come in? How do we fit that into this story? Because they've been around for quite a while.
Well, look, I think that's true. Obviously, people can make money without an underlying set of values, and I don't know enough about those companies, but they may have internal values that are important and worthwhile, even if many people disagree with the social utility of the product that they sell. So, beyond that, I guess I can't comment any further.
Well, P.D., what you're saying really fits very well into this, I think, relatively new thinking that in the past, corporations, especially major corporations, have had, most of them have had a real philanthropic view of how they should deal with their profits, that some of those profits go to causes that are important, often important to individuals related to the company. The CEO has a favorite charity sort of thing. And now the thinking is that the really smart money is being put into projects that have social value, but that also are connected to what the company does in the first place, so that it's sort of all of a piece, as opposed to this sort of sideline of philanthropy. And it sounds like what you've described in the company for which you work, that this is very much, these values are very much in the DNA of the company, and I would imagine, but you can tell us, whether the projects in which it involves itself in social value sense are related to that core business. You're in the healthcare, the pharmaceutical business, right?
Right. So, So, for example, first of all, charitable giving is, a lot of companies do that, and it's a good thing, and it's a worthwhile thing to do. But I guess you're right. What I'm talking about is something deeper than that. So, for example, one of the values that really drives the company is a fundamental value is increasing access to the company's products to people all over the world. Years ago, in order to advance that goal, that value, we established a tiered pricing system, right? So that, the price you pay for the products depends upon the the wealth of the country that you live in, right? So, so people in India and people in Africa and other places with high rates of poverty pay different rates for our drugs, and countries in sort of a middle income tier pay another, and countries in Western Europe, North America pay another. That's an important way, right, in which we try to implement the value of increasing access to our medicines in order to help people, right? In order to allow people to live longer and better lives. That's what I mean about having your business reflect your fundamental values. Yes, of course, we want and need to make money, but we can do so in a way that is very consistent with the underlying purpose of the organization, which is about increasing the overall health of the people of the world.
That makes sense to me, and it's impressive. We also hear that millennials, young people entering the workforce, over the last several years have become more and more interested in really kind of action-based around companies having this sort of set of principles that are widely known and that they at least to the millennials' view, that they are in fact practicing. And they base their decisions as to where to work, those who have options in this matter, that they base their decision on how well that company does in their minds perform on this level. Do you see evidence of that? Do you find that, for instance, young people who are looking for employment in firms really do pay attention to that? Is that something they talk about? And when the chips come down as to choice, it really doesn't have much to do with it, or is there a real focus on this?
Well, I've been around some time, and I think I can say that I also have detected that, right? That the younger people, I think, are looking for companies with values, right? That they're compatible with their own sense of ethics and morality. I mean, even in my own family, I have I have 3 stepkids and 2 kids, and all of them are deeply concerned about precisely that issue. And they're hardly alone. I think their friends are, and I think we see it in the young people coming into the company. We do a lot of internal surveys, and one of the things that emerges from those surveys is that the thing that people most like about the company is its commitment to values, right, and to its mission. It's really the glue that holds the entire organization together. And I see that as actually becoming, a more important aspect of our daily work, right? The way we work, for example, our focus on patients. Our dialogue about what we should do, what decisions we should make, is explicitly, frequently framed by the question of what's the right thing for patients. And that's a lot of that, goes back for generations, and a lot of it has also been sort of crystallized by the current soon to be retired CEO, Andrew Whitty. But it is not just an abstract, in somewhere in the sky sort of concept. It's a daily value that guides decisions that we're making all the time.
That's pretty powerful. So more broadly, what about the role? In fact, the name of this podcast episode is really "Do Values Still Matter? Do Values Matter Now?" And you mentioned the importance of truth at one point. What role do values play in our culture, and where are we going in terms of this values issue? What do you think about that?
Values in our corporate culture, or just our culture generally?
I mean our culture generally.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'm actually a little less optimistic than a little less optimistic about that than I am about how values are actually working in our workplace anyway. I don't know that, certainly if you look at the current U.S. political climate, I don't know that you see a lot of evidence that the lives of, that political lives are sort of being governed by values in the sense that we're using them. The search for power is not a search for values. And so I guess I'm somewhat pessimistic, frankly, about the current political environment in that respect.
It's fascinating to me that because more and more people that I talk with who are involved in major organizations have a story not dissimilar from yours. That is, that there's a real emphasis now, in some cases demanded by employees, the newer employees especially. What are we doing this for? What's the purpose here? What's our mission? Are we really true to it? So there seems to be a big focus on that, and yet when we look at our culture as a nation, if we're talking about just the United States of America, I think you're right. There is some question as to what happened to all that. Where is that Norman Rockwell view of the world that we treat each other fairly? And your pessimism is well noted.
But I do think that, let me have my optimistic face on now. I mean, I do think though that there is an opportunity there, in the sense that the desire to lead a purposeful and meaningful life, informed by values and principles, that's I think sort of ingrained in us, and is an unmet need on our political front. And you're right. I do feel that there is growing sort of momentum within the business world to see that embodied in how we work. Not everywhere, of course, and not not in every industry or every company, but I think there is an identifiable push in that direction, and that has to be viewed as a positive development, I would think, and hopefully at some point the sort of political cycle will turn, and these things will also matter, I think, on the political front more than they currently seem to be governing the behavior of politicians today.
Well, I think you're pointing up something that I've noted as well, and that is that that you didn't say this, but it seems to me that many of us were pretty complacent for a while, and suddenly the thought that there may be a threat to our underlying values, that things we held as obvious and taken for granted, the threat to that has awakened a lot of people to say, wait a second, maybe I need to be more personally aware and more active and more certain that this is actually taking place on a very local basis, starting with myself, and listening to people who have views other than our own. I think do you have a sense of that? It sounds like that might be part of your optimistic piece there.
Well, yes, I think I think that is right. I mean, someone asked me whether the other day whether I have an interest in politics, and I said yes, of course, but I don't understand how you can't sort of understand that we swim in sort of a political ocean, right? And all of us, whether we cared to think about it or not, are players, right, on this political stage, and have a role to play, and it's a role that ought to be informed once again by our values. And we're not all going to agree that that's not going to happen, but we should all agree, right, that the community in which we live in, and the community in which we're building for the future, right, has to be informed by a sense of values, right, of common interests and common principles, and that's that. And so I think in the last few years, we certainly in our family have been more focused probably than we have in the past in what's happening in the political realm, and how that is consistent with our values as people. And we're seeing a parallel sort of development, I think, in the business world, or at least in significant parts of the business world.
One of the things that some people say is a real value is the ability to have a diverse organization, because it adds to it literally adds to the richness of the decisions that get made. And I recall that you said at one point you are a reluctant warrior for diversity. What does that mean, and how does that relate to this whole values discussion?
Yeah. Well, I'm reluctant only in this sense, and I've been involved in diversity in workplace since I started working. But
I know.
I'm reluctant only in the sense that I do I do hearken back to Martin Luther King's wonderful statement about imagining a world where people are judged on the content of their character, and I think that remains a goal, that remains a value, if you will, but one that is still not realized in this country, to state the obvious. And you know, I always had hoped, in my whole life to be judged on my abilities and on my character and those sorts of things. I do sometimes think, though, that that to be honest, right, that I'm also sometimes immediately appraised by other people on the color of my skin, right, and my ethnicity, and and so are every person of color in this country, every woman, every disabled person, every gay person, and on and on. And so it would be, and ideally, it would be great if those were not factored in so heavily in how people evaluate your worth as a human being. So I have fought all my life, to try to help realize Martin Luther King's vision. At the same time, though, I mean, that doesn't mean that this is not an argument for homogeneity either. I mean, I do certainly agree that diversity really adds to the richness of our society. I'm not ashamed of my heritage. To the contrary, I don't think anybody should. I think we bring all of that sort of to the party, and it makes for a far more interesting and fun community culture. And it's always been one of America's certainly great strengths, is our ability to be able to have people of different cultures, backgrounds, etc., work together as a society. It's any kind of threat to that is, I think, really a threat to the fundamental conception of what this country is all about.
Well, you're so right. I think in any company you realize when there are lots of different views, not just different races represented, but just different views in general around the table. Stuff just gets said that's more important, I think.
Well, there's an increasing amount of data about that issue, and I guess the way I've always tried to think about it is, diversity. Ultimately, what we mean really by diversity is what you're talking about: having diversity of thought and experiences, right, that lead to, at the end, better thinking overall for the organization. And the race, ethnicity, those things are proxies for having different perspectives and experiences brought to the table, leading to better thinking, better outcomes and results. And that's what it's about, right? It's not just about having people of different colors, in the same room. It's that having people from different backgrounds and perspectives will ultimately improve, the thinking of the group.
So what if we say that this values driven world, both on an individual basis and on a corporate world, is such a good thing? What's challenging that? What gets in the way of that? Why is this so tough?
Well, because I think this is an age-old issue, right? I mean, there's a constant tension between embracing the new and holding on to the old and the familiar. I think change and different and otherness is always threatening, has always been threatening. And I think especially when you have political players who who exacerbate and emphasize the otherness and use the otherness as a basis for rallying support for themselves or for their party. I think it can become a destructive thing. I mean, it's natural, right? This fear of the other, I think, is probably also pretty much baked in, and is some maybe contradictory to some other things in human nature. I think the task of politics is to try to bring out the best in people and not the worst in people. I'm not so sure that we have that balance right in our current system today.
So, how about Petey? You are a senior person in a very global business. In fact, you mentioned in the pharmaceutical efforts that your company makes to help people around the world take advantage of the kinds of products and services that the company puts forth. So, you think globally yourself. Where does the fact that our world has gotten so small based because of technology, and yet we do seem often to be acting in a way that's counterproductive? When I say we, I mean our own country. How do we sort of spread this view of that the values include not just us guys, but the whole world?
Right. Well, it's. I think a lot of people are having this feeling that there's this disconnect now between sort of global enterprises, multinational organizations like ours and many others, and a politics that seems determined to sort of discount or even deny that reality, right? This idea that one can you know that one can sort of ignore the fact that we are completely interwoven, from a business perspective with all other parts of the world, and that in fact the ties that bind us with the rest of the world and with people all over the world are getting stronger, all the time. And contrast that with a politics that determinedly is looking inward, right, and looking to an imagined past of homogeneity and exclusiveness, right? It's setting up a profound disconnect, I think, between politics on the one hand and business, the way it's increasingly being practiced today, of necessity and because it's good, right? Because ultimately, international business, works best in an open environment, and that ultimately that creates more wealth for everyone. Now, there's distribution issues, which ought to be appropriately the task of politics, but the task of business, right? It seems to me is to create more wealth and more opportunities for more people. There are lots of people out there who still, who have a lot, I think, to gain in terms of a global economy, and it's actually an important function of what we're doing, to try to create an environment in which they benefit from this, and that nobody loses really in the long run out of that. The whole world really benefits from an increase of this kind of sort of internationalism.
It makes me think that if every child knew that they were going to be able to spend a year somewhere else in the world, living in another country, and it doesn't matter which country it is, and then come back and share their changed self with the people around them, I think we'd be way ahead of ourselves. There's something about that experience of being in a place where people live differently, but you understand that their values are really pretty much the same as our own.
Well, and that people are the same, and I have benefited from being able to travel and needing to travel on the business side, but also because we're personally as a family adventuresome and do a lot of traveling. Yet, I marvel, of course, at all the great things there are to see in the world. We recently came back from a trip to Cambodia, which is a marvelous place, and saw the great temples in Angkor Wat and the surrounding communities, which are just an incredible thing. I always, come back from places like that with the same sort of general thoughts that, oh my God, there's such incredible variety and so many wonderful things that we people have built, and yet but then on another level, it also shows how we are the same, right? That human beings have always been the same and are the same now, regardless of how different their environments are. They all want the same things, and there's a temple in Cambodia where, for I don't know, 100 yards, there are some sculptures, carved into the walls, and they're sculptures of everyday life in Cambodia in I think the year 1000. And there are people. The sculptures show people making noodles and betting on rooster fights and and having a baby and and they are recognizably human, right? They're recognizably us. You can see us in them, and they've all. And it is a powerful reminder of the commonality of humanity over 1,000 years ago, with different ethnicity and languages and all of that, and yet there we are, we staring at ourselves in the temple.
That's so well said, PD. Is there anything I haven't asked you that you think is really relevant that you'd like to bring up around this whole issue of do values really matter anymore?
I think businesses like to talk a lot about motivation, right? How you motivate people. How do they get up in the morning? What keeps them going? Listen, money is not what does it. Yes, money's important. We need money. It's a great thing. But the real thing that keeps people working hard for an organization, especially when the organization is in crisis and trouble, are the values, right? The sense of mission. What are we here for? What is our purpose? I think, all of us, right, have always searched for meaning. And I think the most effective organizations, whether it's just political organizations or business organizations, are, survive and are successful because they're able to articulate and have the people in the organization accept, a set of underlying values, a common sense of purpose and mission. And I think that's how we have to live our lives.
When you find that thing that's bigger than yourself, to which you want to be committed, I think that's something that's underscoring what you're saying.
Right.
Well, this has been, I think, really illuminating. I really appreciate your comments, and thank you just so much, PD. At some point, I'm eager for us to meet because you're a wealth of valuable information. Thanks very much.
Well, I hope we meet soon, and I very much enjoyed this. This was fun.
Great. Thanks a lot. Talk to you soon.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.